I don't believe in a positive reinforcement trainer. I don't believe in a reward-based trainer. I don't believe there's any actual definition to describe either one of those two.
I agree.
Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement are both sides of the same coin, aren't they? You know, approaching safety can't exist without the avoidance of danger, etc., etc., etc. But for me, anybody who puts their personal preferences, their beliefs, their ideological agenda before the immediate welfare of the animal that they're presented with, or animals affected by the behavior of that animal, is somebody I would not wish to share the same table with.
All right, so I got a great guest here, guys. Jamie we've been friends through the internet for quite many years. I think we face the same challenges among our peers and among clients and stuff. But you're facing a really different issue in England where you are with this proposed ban that's about to go, that they're pushing to go through, I guess, in England. I'm fascinated with what you're doing with really proving the viability of proper ecollar training. I see your videos where you're showing the ability to control dogs in real situations, like with livestock. And I think this is a big piece. And the struggle for people who don't understand this is that in areas such as in England and in the Midwest in America and other countries as well, dogs have a proclivity to chase things, and what game or livestock is among that. So you're dealing a lot with, and I want to let you take the helm on this, your issue with dogs chasing sheep, then herding sheep, and then those dogs either being shot by farmers or other things like that is a huge concern to you. And I respect that. I want you to talk a little bit about that challenge that you're facing there and what you're doing about it.
Okay, thank you, Robert, and you know, I very much appreciate the opportunity to come on and discuss this. Like you say, it is a major animal welfare concern. It's two-part, really. You have the animal welfare concern. It's not just in England. This is an international issue. Predation by dogs towards a vulnerable species considered prey species by the dog, where those species are protected, be it by law or in terms of conservation, or they're owned by somebody else. It is incumbent upon us as responsible dog owners to be able to responsibly control our dogs and to be able to protect those other animals. So there's that aspect of it. And there is also the aspect of, which is something that I know that you touch on a lot, is other groups, outside stakeholders, basically projecting an image of what the electronic training collar is and what it causes, the resultant fallout, etc., backed by cherry-picked science, pseudoscience, very often very weak science in order to support those claims. But yes, my personal and that of a great many people that I work with, I'm fortunate enough to work with, goal, direction, objective, motivation is the protection of animals. And my personal belief, if you like, a personal statement, is that my responsibility doesn't solely sit and end at the end of my leash. It goes beyond that. I have moral obligations, I have legal obligations, I have welfare obligations to consider, and the electronic training collar sits as a unique tool in being able to assist not just myself, but other people like myself, trainers like myself, owners, dog owners like myself throughout the world, in ensuring that our dogs are safe, reliable, responsible, out and about in the greater world.
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's a huge piece, and you tackling it, I'm tackling it here from different angles. I think you're in a very vulnerable position in Europe, because I think I believe you said in Wales the e-collar is banned, and in many countries in Europe it's completely banned. I don't think they're not using it. I really do believe that a lot of people in sports and in other things are still using prong and e-collars, and I would be doing the same thing if it was illegal. Because it's for the betterment of the dog. I think this is a tool that really has come and has moved dog training to a different level. It's not an inhumane tool. The only time I think it's inhumane is every time an opponent of this tool takes that tool and puts it on somebody on a TV show or in a government type situation and just fries the person and says, we shouldn't be doing this to dogs. You were on a TV show not too long ago, and I think you dealt with that quite a bit, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I mean, it's very easy to sit back on your sofa and watch a TV program that's being conducted live, and to be able to criticize, or to be able to, become the what we used to call in policing the 9 o'clock jury. The people that turned up the following morning and said shoulda, woulda, coulda. But the fact of the matter is that when you are faced with a question where somebody says turn it up, you cannot not turn it up, because that infers that you are denying something, that you're hiding something. In electronic training college, yes, you can cap certain electronic training collars. You can limit, lock the stimulation level on certain electronic training collars, or most electronic training collars. But the fact of the matter is, if somebody wants to experience what it feels like when you hold an electronic training collar and turn it up, then that's their prerogative. And it is in those instances, you're caught between a rock and a hard place. You either say, okay, I'm going to turn this up, but the fact of the matter is, you're not just about to tear the back end out of a deer. You're not terrorizing the neighborhood cat. You're not chasing the traffic down the road. You're not about to, cause a heavily pregnant ewe to abort, as a result of me disemboweling you, because that is my motivation at that time. So really, the comparison is moot. It's non-beneficial, but equally, to not provide the questioner, the interviewer, the opportunity to be able to feel that sensation. Were I to run the same interviews again, I would probably put those points. In fact, I definitely would. I'd put those points in. I'd say, look, not only are we species-wise, canines and humans, we're not the same species. We're not in the same motivational state. Equally, then you have the subjective interpretation of us as individuals, not just breeds, but as individuals, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. So in holding remote collars and turning remote collars up, and a human perception of that stimulation, that electronic stimulation, as I would say to any client that I work with personally, it simply provides you with a sort of like an understanding from your point of view, but you aren't that animal. So some animals will experience things where you think, how on earth are you experiencing that? I couldn't. And other animals will think, you would think, well, hang on, how on earth are you experiencing that? I can't actually feel anything. So the subjectivity, the individual nature of everything is incredibly important when it comes to putting things across. And I would encourage anybody in a similar situation where those sort of questions come up, or those sort of if you like, challenges are presented, is that you do break down the actual, the components of that, of the fact that, what I feel, how I interpret something, the context in which I'm interpreting it is entirely alien to the situation in which it might be applied and the purposes for which it is applied. I don't chew rocks in the garden. I don't strip the wood off logs for pleasure. Do you know what I mean? There are multiple different differences between humans and any other species. But yes, you're right. In the UK, in England, and in Scotland, the same groups. Very much animal rights motivated, not animal welfare motivated, but animal rights motivated, with a political agenda, funded principally from a financial point of view, and an ability or an intention, a desire to control the dog training market, because it's a very, very lucrative market on a national level or on an international level, will come together and present their case before decision makers in saying why a particular tool should be banned. I mean, it's ridiculous, Robert. It does. I don't need to tell you. It's ridiculous that the focus is on a singular piece of equipment as opposed to the mind and intention of the individual that actually happens to be operating that piece of equipment. So it's an education issue. It's not a legislation issue. But yes, in the UK in 2018, the Secretary of State pledged to ban not the sale, not the purchase, not the ownership, but the use of handheld electronic training collars, not containment systems, not anti-bark collars, just handheld electronic training collars, because they hadn't done their research. They hadn't done their due diligence in terms of what electronic training collars encompass. And then, of course, you have the, technology advances, doesn't it, at a pace. And we've now got invisible boundary, phone app operated containment systems for cattle, for goats, for sheep, that are like 10, 20 times the output, the energy output that is available for dogs. And they find themselves in this situation now where, hold on, we're looking at speciesism here, where we're placing one animal, or the experiences of one animal, in order to protect it, as being either above or less deserving of the other. So yes, in the UK, it's still in the air. Nothing has been stamped out at the moment. Nothing has been pushed forward. The same in Scotland. The same push was put in Scotland, where they brought out guidance. So you'll see a lot of press coverage where they'll say that e-collars are banned in Scotland. That isn't true. That isn't true. The Scottish government put forward guidance that basically said, we don't necessarily agree with them, we don't necessarily like them, but if you are going to use them, perhaps you should follow this guidance. And then the same groups who were campaigning for the ban in the first place have gone back, very, very angry about the fact that the Kennel Club in particular in the UK are very, very angry about the fact that their objectives, their agreed objectives, weren't met. And so rallying again to get more members of parliament involved to try and get this push through. So as it stands at the moment in the UK, to make it very, very clear for people, only Wales is the country that has banned electronic training aids, and that was in 2010.
You know what fascinates me about this whole thing is, let me actually switch something here. The issue I have with the whole thing is, I don't know, I believe it's the same in England and Great Britain and probably throughout Europe. In America, we have animal cruelty laws. I mean, there are clearly laws on the books in, I would think, most civilized countries. I would at least think throughout the US and Europe that abusing an animal is illegal. So the idea of adding something to it which overrides that law. In other words, I can use an e-collar in a very non-cruel way. I can use it at a low stim to communicate with my dog at a little distance, or I can use it at a higher level to really correct the dog for a bad behavior. But all uses of this collar, these radical people want to make illegal, and they're really coming down on people. I mean, I hear name calling. I've been called names for using e-collar, and I don't mind for me because I'll ride against it. But other people are like, well, then maybe I shouldn't use it. And they're taking this away and they're vilifying a tool. And I've seen plenty of people use, those center pull harnesses or head halties in such inhumane ways that it makes no sense to me. Why do you think are they taking a tool, a singular tool, and making this the demon, as opposed to just following animal abuse laws and allowing them to be prosecuted for animal abuse if they use an e-collar or if they use anything, a leash, or a rubber band or whatever it might be?
If you were to look at the UK in particular, so we have our animal laws, in fact, our animal welfare laws. Animal welfare laws were brought in before there were laws against cruelty to children. Animals took place, before children, and you have. It is illegal to cause unnecessary suffering to a protected animal. So the protections there are multiple other laws in place as well that basically repeat the same thing in different forms. But ultimately, the Animal Welfare Act, it's there. It's there to be able to protect animals. Why are people jumping on a particular tool? Because it's easy, Robert, because it's easy, because it has the word electronic or it has the word electrical attached to it. And so it is very, very easy to create a narrative, to sensationalize what that actually means, what that is, how it's perceived, in order to create a visceral response in your audience where they think, whoa, why would anybody do that? And if you look in England in particular, and in 2018, when Dogs Trust, which is the first dog charity in the UK to breach 100 million in terms of what it was worth. Yeah, these are big players. These are big players, very, very well heeled, financially well heeled, and politically too. And, that basically put out this narrative of a cartoon dog. It had to be a cartoon dog because there was no visual evidence of an actual genuine dog with, lightning appearing towards the neck of the dog and the clouds all darkening and, sounds of high voltage and everything else and 11 terrifying seconds of torture, etc., etc. if you don't know anything else, it is very, very easy to be sucked in by that. It is very, very easy to think that's wicked, that's cruel. Where do I sign? Where do I donate? Where do I donate? That's a big part. To whom do I donate? So a lot of these charities are dependent upon public support, upon public funds, upon legacies left by well-meaning people who think they're doing the right thing based on what they're told. And it's very, very well orchestrated. You have certain groups, I shan't say which ones, but there are certain national animal protection charities, not just in the UK, but throughout the world as well, similar sort of acronyms, who are going into schools and teaching children at a young age about animal issues. And one such question that is being put to, you'd call it high school, I suppose, pre-secondary school in the UK. So kids under the age of like 11, asking them questions about what do you think of electrocuting dogs? What do you think of electric collars on dogs, etc.? So because it's far easier to influence a naive mind and to condition a naive mind to support your narrative than it is to, certainly in a large aspect, to change the opinion of somebody who is wise enough to look at all of the evidence and to consider all of the factors. That's the avenues that they're going down. But in terms of why is it a tool? Look, let me just say this as well. Whilst I focus on predation, predation is my, my personal sort of like, I guess my channel, if you like. But the reason for that is because it's broader. I see it as being not just affecting the dog, but affecting other animals or people that are involved with that dog. And ever since, I can remember since early childhood, probably like yourself, I've had a love of animals and a love of protecting animals and doing the right thing by them. I'm pragmatic, I have very much a utilitarian aspect outlook in many degrees. I will do what's in the best interests of the animal, irrespective of how that makes me feel or might make me feel on an emotional level. My personal feelings come secondary to the needs of that animal. And when you look at the way that I will focus on predation, I fully accept and I fully understand that there are multiple ways to use the same tool. So there are people who say, hang on, my dog's deaf. My dog's overcoming fears. My dog is, needs negative reinforcement in conjunction with positive reinforcement and positive punishment, negative punishment, etc., in order to progress. And let's not just focus on this one aspect of things. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. I wholeheartedly accept that. But I would just say that there is plenty. If I were to say I have a dog that has a fear of, I don't know, getting into elevators, of traveling in the vehicle. I have a dog that has a fear of people, where I can use an electronic training collar as part of a program to allow that dog to overcome those fears, to break through, to realize that their expectations of how bad they thought things were going to be are actually unrealized and unwarranted. That's absolutely fantastic, and it's absolutely true. But you're not going to convince many people by saying, I will take a dog that is afraid of X and let me use their narrative. I will use an electric shock collar to teach that dog not to be afraid anymore. It's a very, very hard argument to win. But when you are looking at, so in the UK, for example, and I believe the States is the same and many other countries are the same, if a dog is chasing after a livestock animal that belongs to somebody else, that dog can lawfully be shot dead. If there are no alternative means of being able to control that dog at that time, that dog can be shot dead. And that isn't a swift death. That isn't a humane dispatch, being shot by, whoever happens to have turned up on their quad bike or in their tractor with a 12 bore that happens to blast at a moving target through a field. It isn't kind. Yeah. And a lot of the time as well is that's post-event. So the dog has already committed atrocities, if you like, in terms of towards other animals. And I don't consider that to be good enough. And I think that there is a sound, very difficult to argument position to say, look, as I say, in the UK, we can shoot it, but we can't startle it. I could hit the dog over the back of the head with a shovel if I want to, as long as I kill it humanely. That's perfectly legal. I can cut it up, I can cook it, and I can eat it. That's perfectly legal. But I can't startle it. I can't
Yeah.
startle it to prevent loss of life, mass loss of life, and effect to other people's income and their mental health. There's no logic to that, Robert.
Yeah. I mean, you're very, very rational with it. And you know, one thing I always try to get away from is terminology. Like when I was teaching my program at the shelter, I always stay away from the word punishment. I don't believe in punishing dogs. I think what you're saying, okay, the dog killed the sheep and then the person comes up and hits it over the head with a shovel or shoots it. That's true punishment. That's the classic definition of punishment. I think in science, the word punishment has been misused and miscategorized. So we're saying, well, we're punishing dogs. And I think it takes a negative connotation. And that kind of goes right in line with this whole idea of the word shock collar. You know, the average remote collar has the same battery in it that your cell phone has, right? It's like maybe 5 volts. Now, if you think of what a cell phone can do, we've seen videos of cell phones exploding in people's pockets, causing burns, you know, shocking and all these things. My point is always, you know, if we can kind of get away from this terminology of saying it's a shock collar and, you know, and getting to the point, it's a remote collar and it can be used as a shock collar, but certainly I could take a regular British slip lead and I could strangulate a dog, but we don't call it a strangulation leash. We call it a slip leash. Those terms are really powerful. And you're so well spoken. I mean, probably a lot of it's your British accent. You come across so well. I think I come across really kind of like, man, are you stupid? You know, you come across so eloquent. It should be easier for you. But don't you think that terminology, like people, you know, and I'm saying the other side, labeling this as, you know, well, they're shocking dogs or electrocuting dogs, where in essence, it's not really electrocution. It's a stimulation. Just like a TENS unit or, you know, a stun gun or whatever. These things are not really looked down. I mean, anybody can go in and buy a stun gun anywhere, you know, and or a hot shot. I don't know if you guys have hot shots in England where, you know, they use them on cattle all the time. And people here have used them on dogs.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful shock stimulation. You know, that's not even a stimulation. That's just a bolt. So, I mean, do you see like that the terminology might also come into hurting us a bit?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest issues here is that you've got behavioral science. Okay, so you've got science from operant conditioning in particular, but you've got behavioral psychology that has basically been snatched by aspects of the dog training community, the behavior modification community, the animal community. So punishment, when somebody hears the word punishment, positive punishment, I think, well, strike the dog, you know, kick the dog, do something terrible hit the dog with a blunt instrument, etc. The true meaning of punishment, positive punishment, is to present something, to add something that decreases the likelihood of the behavior that caused it to be added. But the vast majority of people don't know that. The vast majority of people who are pushing this agenda, who are pushing this narrative, know that the vast majority of people don't know that. So when I talk about punishing dogs, certainly if I'm producing, you know, scientific research that basically it doesn't split, it lumps, and it lumps all forms of potential positive punishment, negative punishment into the same basket. So it doesn't matter if I say positive punishment doesn't work or positive punishment causes negative fallout in the animal, psychological distress in the animal, therefore positive punishment is bad. In that positive punishment basket at the time, there wasn't an electronic training collar. There was kicking, hitting, alpha rolling, stroking, smacking, you know, all those sort of things.
Yeah.
But we'll throw electronic training collars in there as well, just because they're all positive punishment, you know. So it's a very, very deliberate act, and it's very, very easy when you're faced with somebody who, you know, one of the proponents of that sort of like narrative, if you like. It's very easy to pull it apart because that is exactly what's happening. And so, you know, for example, I put a video out a while ago, a study that was put out in Scotland, Royal Veterinary. It wasn't the Royal Veterinary College, but it was to do with the Royal Veterinary College in Scotland, where they were looking at the primary reason for the death, the euthanasia of healthy dogs under the age of 3 years old. And the third principal reason for that was problematic behavior, undesirable behavior as it was classed. So a third of dogs under the age of 3 that are perfectly healthy are killed, knowingly killed, for undesirable behavior. And what it then said was, you know, people who are facing undesirable behavior may reach for alternatives that can cause, worse situations like electric shock collars, and then cited a study. So I contacted the guy who actually wrote this paper, and I said, "Look, you've said this. Where's the evidence for it?" "I'm too busy to speak to you at the moment." That's okay. I'll come up. We'll meet. Where's the evidence for it? Yeah. There is no evidence for it, but it feeds into this sort of like pseudoscientific stream where you're thinking, come on, this is absolutely ludicrous. And the actual research project was funded by the Kennel Club. And the researcher that I spoke to was given a special award by the Kennel Club, who are one of the principal lobbying groups in the UK for the ban of electronic training collars. So there are like tendrils that are reaching into various political, financial, well-established associations and organisations, well-respected associations and organisations that are basically coming on board with this narrative because it does no harm. It does no harm, but you're right. You're absolutely right. The use of emotive terminology, misleading terminology, that isn't by chance. That isn't by believe me. I've sat with the people that use it. The key people that are pushing that forward. That is a very, very deliberate means of manipulating naive minds to have innocent people believe dishonest ideology.
Sure. I mean, I think the other thing too is, people don't understand that nobody wants to hurt a dog, and I mean, I've dedicated my life all the way from when I was doing Bound Angels to what I'm doing now is trying to find a better way to give dogs a better life. And if a short-term consequence can mean a long-term freedom, who wouldn't take that? I mean, I can't imagine any single creature, a single-celled organism. Every creature moves away from pain and towards pleasure. And if you can teach that to a dog in a simple way, and then we get into this responsibility that I was talking about. We brought dogs into this world thousands and thousands of years ago. And back then there was no Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and slamming people for doing things. But it was probably a pretty ugly process, similar to the painted pony in the American Indian lore, where you had to do certain things to get a dog to become better. Now, the predation thing is something that I talk about a lot, and I think people who really understand dogs, I've had a lot of guests on the podcast who understand tough dogs. And I think when you get into that predatorial aspect, then you're going to have all these, radical people in science saying, well, there is no predatory behavior left in dogs. That's been bred out. But it's kind of insane that you could actually say that if you've even just seen a German Shepherd chase a squirrel through the park. I mean, that's basic predation 101. But these people want to believe that there is no alpha theory anymore, that's been discredited, but it hasn't been discredited. One person who said he founded it or studied it or came up with it now doesn't believe in it. So in my opinion, this guy just can't make up his mind. It's on, it's off, it's on, it's off. The truth of the matter is that the study, and I talked about it in one of my podcasts, where when they released the wolves back into Yellowstone here in the United States, it's an amazing, amazing documentary. I watched it. And you saw the people who were studying these wolves saying, wow, you can see that only certain wolves get to eat first. Certain wolves get to mate. Certain wolves get to go to the front of the pack. And that's like that, if you have been to Africa and you watch gorillas, our closest living relatives, it is the exact same way. The silverback rules the entire pack, the entire group of gorillas. Why can't people, that we're talking to, I mean, especially you being so well-spoken, why can't people just go, wow, yeah, you know what, there obviously is, I mean, there's alpha theory in human beings. You go to a bar, that's a tough guy, that's the guy who's telling the jokes, that's the guy who's the head of the party, right? Isn't it common sense? Like, do we have to be, I mean, have we come down to such a dumb level that we believe what people feed us? I mean, how do you feel about that? It's got to be frustrating to you too.
Yes. Yes, right? To the fact that we've come down to that dumb level, and yes to the fact that it's very, very frustrating. But the problem with dominance, so David Meek is the guy that you were talking about who studied the wolves and turned around and said, right, okay, so there's a dominance, there's a hierarchy, they They fight in order to protect resources, etc. And then thought, oh blimey, and went and studied somewhere else and said, oh dear, I was studying captive wolves, where different wolves from different familial backgrounds, different packs were put together, and they were contained within this enclosure, so they had no option because they didn't have the option to flee. But then when I studied them in the wild, you realize that they actually maintain a distance where possible, but that doesn't. The alpha theory, or the dominance theory, of course there is a dominance hierarchy. Of course there is a dominance hierarchy in every mammalian social species. In fact, in multiple animal social species, of course there is. What has happened again, it's that grasping, that cherry picking, that manipulation, that sensationalism, that exaggeration of a particular aspect, which is, we're not saying that there isn't a hierarchy. We're saying that the human trying to become the dominant alpha over that particular mammalian species, over the dog, over whatever it happens to be, that is unnatural, because that doesn't happen in the wild, if you like, the appeal to the wild sort of argument. But the fact of the matter is, any social structure, if you took away, you look at yourself in the States, you look at myself in England, you look at anywhere in France, in Germany, in Belgium, in South Africa, in Australia, and wherever, every single member of that society is bound together by social norms, by social expectations, by legal requirements, and right the way up, whether that's children with parents or with siblings or with classmates or with employers or employees, or moving on, or with police officers or with armies or wherever it is. If you read Murray Sidman's book Coercion and Its Fallout, and it talks about this, where the use of control, the use of coercive control to achieve balance it's omnipresent. It's as species that require the sort of like the cooperation of other members of a species. You have to know the rules. You have to know the rules. But we've got to a place where the idea of a dominant dog is considered, well, there's no such thing as a dominant dog, because David Meek went and studied wolves and said there was no such thing as dominance. And that's absolutely preposterous. But the fact is that me thinking, well, I am the more dominant dog than the dominant dog, and expecting that dog to think he's a dominant dog, that is equally preposterous. But me saying, I need to be able to control you, I need to be able to show you that life carries guidelines, life carries discipline, life carries boundaries, in order for us both to live a successful and happy life. There's nothing ludicrous in that. There's nothing false in that. I'm not trying to be a leader of a non-human species. I'm simply trying to bring that non-human species into our human environment, which is what we've done, and say, okay, these are the rules within this environment for you to be able to live, so that you don't become one of those third of healthy under 3-year-old dogs that are destroyed simply because you have what we consider to be undesirable behavior. And I think when we talk about language as well, Robert, sorry for me prattling on a little bit here, but when we talk about language as well, I think it's important to own the thorns, grasp the nettles, and say, we can own that. So if we're going to say, okay, there is something that a dog, it doesn't matter, take electronic collar or any other tool, there's got something that a dog's going to find unpleasant. A dog may find something painful fleetingly. Pain exists in order to protect us. It exists as a base medium through which to say to us, do not do, avoid, move away from it, etc. There's nothing wrong with it. If you take away pain, there's an actual condition in humans where the inability to feel pain exists, and those humans rarely live beyond their 20s. And when they're diagnosed, they often have missing fingertips, nails, aspects, sores that have abscessed into various other things, because they didn't even know, because their body wasn't able to say to them, there is something here that we consider to be unpleasant or aversive. We need to move away from it. We need to address it. We need to highlight it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Equally, and this isn't me saying that, oh, well, if we're talking about electronic collars, it's pain, it's fear, it's such and such, it's such and such. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm sure, as you know, that isn't true anyway. But even the word fear, there is nothing to fear in owning the word fear. There are certain things, chasing and killing somebody else's animal, that you need to fear. It won't do you any harm to fear that animal and to keep away from it, because the alternative is buckshot up your backside. And that isn't pleasant for anybody. So if you think for a moment of your lifetime, I can never say whether a dog or any other animal experiences pain. It's a subjective emotion that has to be interpreted. Yes, we can look at behavioral responses and cortisol levels and heart rate, etc., which we might associate with, but we can never truly know. It's unknowable. And Perron, which in a behavioral address in about 2002, said that there is no mention of fear or pain in scientific discourse, and there's a good reason for that, because it's immeasurable. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and increase and promote behavioral responses that we associate with positive welfare states, but it equally doesn't mean that there isn't a place, certainly where life is at risk, of the dog or some other animal or person or whatever, where the dog thinks, whoa, I don't particularly like that. That's not a bad thing, and we shouldn't be afraid. We're beyond being afraid to say that isn't a bad thing. But too much of our defense in people who are open and receptive and pragmatic and objective, and realistic in terms of these things is about shying away from words that we don't like and trying to sort of like use expressions or terminology instead that we think is more fitting to society. Look, we just need to own it. We just need to say, this is it. The vast majority of everything that we'll do will provide positive emotional states for the animal, will provide positive outcomes for the animal, behavioral outcomes for the animal. But there are times when a negative emotional state and a negative outcome are desired, are desirable, and are very, very beneficial to the animal and society at large.
So it's so funny. You're saying something, and it makes me think of a point. You say that in scientific they don't talk about pain and stuff like that. But you do notice one thing that's quite fascinating is the one time when they talk about, we did this study and we showed that by the adverse effects of shock collar training raises cortisol levels, increases stress. It's okay to put pain onto the dog in the name of a scientific experiment to get a couple numbers on a piece of paper to prove something that will not get anywhere. But it's not okay to create that discomfort, pain, or aversion, whatever that might be, to save a dog's life potentially. Is that the most stupid thing you've heard in your life, or what?
Can you imagine applying that logic to the veterinary profession? Yeah. Can you imagine saying to the veterinary profession, you cannot cause discomfort for the dog? I have a dog. I'm going to put a video up later this evening, Robert, so I won't sort of like blow it at the moment. But I recorded something. I've been unfortunate enough to have two particular incidents recently. One was the death of a dog who I loved to pieces, who went too soon from a heart condition. And the other one was a very, very unfortunate, horrible incident that happened to another one of my dogs, which is what it will be. But what it, as in what I will put up, but what it showed me was I followed the veterinarian's advice. To be completely honest with you, so my dog had a condition, and the vet said, "This is what I suggest." And I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to put the dog through that suffering. I'm not prepared to put the dog through that suffering. I was wrong, by the way. I was wrong, but hindsight. But I'm not averse to saying no. I won't do that. If I can humanely put the dog to sleep, I'll do it. Because she is suffering and it needs to be done. But I followed the veterinarian's advice, and the dog went through a period of suffering, brief, albeit unknowing or unknowable because she can't self-report. But and there she is to where she is now. But the whole notion of that of that you cannot do or you should not do, it's at best it's naive, at worst it's willfully ignorant. And the willful ignorance is the thing where, I know this to be true, but I can't, I'm going to deny it. I'm going to deny it because what I want to believe is more important. And for me, I don't care. I don't believe in a positive reinforcement trainer. I don't believe in a reward-based trainer. I don't believe there's any actual definition to describe either one of those two.
I agree.
Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement are both sides of the same coin, aren't they? Approaching safety can't exist without the avoidance of danger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, anybody who puts their personal preferences, their beliefs, their ideological agenda before the immediate welfare of the animal that they're presented with or animals affected by the behavior of that animal is somebody I would not wish to share the same table with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I see it all the time, though. And your whole statement of humans over dogs. I mean, I think if we want to be responsible for these animals that we apparently are supposed to love so greatly, I would think that we must have, you know, position over them, to control them, to when they do something incorrect. I always tell people, if a dog was attacking your dog, a big dog was attacking your little dog, and you had the ability to put an e-collar on him and stop him, would you do it? Or would you let him just kill your dog? You know, it makes no sense to me, the whole idea of this force-free idea. I'm a positive trainer. I believe in everything starting with a cookie and a toy. Where it goes from there is up to the dog. I did the same thing when I taught martial arts. I believe in teaching at the level of the person or animal that's in front of me. Limiting that, though, by saying I will never go further. I will not use and I hate the term an aversive tool, because it's not an aversive tool. You know, if you use a harness, you're still withholding the dog from pulling into the street. You know, whether you're using a center pull, if you're using a halty, you're using any kind of a contraption, if you really want to train force-free, then in my opinion, that force-free should truly be operant and just waiting for the behaviors and marking those behaviors. Sadly, as you know, because you're dealing with predatory situations, and I've dealt with them many times, predatory overrides operant. You know, there's nobody who can put a dog in the middle of a field unless the dog is a complete anomaly, and I've seen maybe one or two in my life, that you can put this dog in the middle of a field, tell it to stay, and then have a chicken run in front of it, or a squirrel or whatever, and the dog won't move. And this is the situation where these trainers can't prove their own point, and people are still listening to them. And the idea, the whole fallout idea of what they call corrective-based training is a complete misnomer. I don't know why no one is attacking them on that, because I do every chance I get. I say, I'm one person who has used avoidance in teaching, whether it's obedience, whether it's in rattlesnake avoidance, whether it's in predatory behavior. I've used it. I've never one time of the countless dogs I've trained, I've never seen a fallout. I've never seen a dog become more aggressive because they were corrected out of aggression. I've never seen a dog become more predatory on chase. The only dogs I see that have gotten bit by rattlesnakes when they were trained on e-collars were ones that were trained on low collar stem, where it made the dog very curious about it. But the trainer was going to be humane. They were going to use the e-collar in a humane way and only use a slight stim or a vibrate. So now the dog builds a curiosity towards something, where just like in protection dog sports, you can use there's a great trainer who says you can use the e-collar as an igniter or a brake. You know, and a lot of times people will use it as an igniter when it's used incorrectly, and then there's a problem. But again, it's just bad training. It's not about the tool; it's about the training being faulty.
There you go, and that's exactly it. You know, that's why it's down to education. It's not down to legislation. It's down to improving the understanding of the individual. But like you say there, you know, with the rattlesnake, what I consider to be humane, you know, if you understand even a degree of behavioral psychology in terms of, you know, how do I rapidly and for a long period of time, to, you know, using sort of like, you know, more everyday terminology, how do I suppress that behavior for a long period of time, for a lifetime? How do I suppress it? Well, I'm not going to do that by doing what I think feels best. That is detach myself, you know, the dentist that looks inside of my mouth and thinks that needs to be removed, the physicists who projected, you know, radiotherapy to the back of my own eye. They didn't sit there and do it with their own personal thoughts, their personal preferences in place. They saw that there was a need to act in order to preserve and promote the safety and well-being of the subject that was presented before them, and they did what needed to be done. You know, they do what needs to be done, and they do the same thing again, and they do the same thing again. Yes, there might be momentary discomfort, there might be momentary pain, there might be a sort of like wishing that I could sit in a tent and have somebody hit me with wet leaves and blow a particular smoke in my face and say, there you go, now the spirits are going to take away the evil cancer that lies within you. But unfortunately, I don't go for that. And I'm happy to, with the way that the people act, and in any profession outside of dog training, there are things where people interact with other people, with other animals, certainly within medical professions, veterinary professions, where you do things that you think, I wish there were an alternative way to do this. However, there isn't an alternative way to do this, and science and huge amounts of empirical evidence support the fact that what I'm about to do is the most beneficial act for you and for any other animal or person affected by you. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with it, Robert. And I think that's where, I'm not I've got 6 dogs. I look, my social media accounts are, full of me being sort of like bombarded by them. I sometimes think, geez, man, you're supposed to be a professional dog trainer and you do it, your dogs are climbing all over you. This doesn't look very alpha, Jamie. But, it's just that it isn't my thing. My thing is protection. My thing is preserving and promoting safety, responsibility. The Association of Responsible Dog Owners that I set up in 2018 was to provide a voice specifically for that, for dog owners who could come together and think, okay, many of them have used electronic training collars, there's no doubt about that. But I think that quite often comes part and parcel of when you have problematic dogs that have failed to respond effectively or appropriately to alternative, training approaches, where people have thought, what else can I do? And they've opened themselves up and they've found a resolution, a successful and humane resolution in what they've done. And then have decided, you know what, let's push this. Let's provide a voice. On my shirt there, that side, where are we? That side. The ARDO, the Association of Responsible Dog Owners, is basically purely exists to provide that pragmatic, that realistic, that experienced voice of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dog owners who have actually been in situations that other people can only fantasize about, can only sensationalize, can only produce cartoons in respect of. In the UK, Robert, I don't know if you know, but in the UK, there has never, ever, ever been a prosecution for the misuse of an electronic training collar on a dog. Ever. All you have is in Wales, when they banned in 2010, shortly after that, some poor guy had a containment collar on his dog that was actually found outside of I think it was switched off, was actually found outside of the perimeter of his garden. And he was then basically taken to court as a test case, as an example case, and fined about £3,000 for having this collar. Yeah. Meanwhile, in Scotland last year, some guy clubs his neighbour's dog to death with a hammer, and I think he got fined about £600-700. So it just goes to show how this isn't it's not an animal welfare matter. This is what people really, really need to get to, beyond social media sort of like discourse, beyond the frustrations that it makes us feel, beyond like how can the science, the this, that, and the other, the actual crux of this, the epicenter, the horrible, bubbling, rotten core of this is that there is agenda. And that agenda is driven by finance, and it is driven by political aspiration. That's the sad truth about it. And if there's something that I could tell, one thing that I could say to everybody who is thinking of fighting this, and anybody who supports the idea of banning tools, that is the driving motivation. That is your primary reinforcer for doing so. Finance and political objective. They are both very, very, very ugly idols.
Yeah, I mean, that is the truth. One thing I think is so fascinating too is because this law will come and go, and I'm sure it will gain some steam. They've tried it here in New York and San Francisco. Here's the problem. In shelters, and again, like you were saying, the third of the dogs that were being euthanized were behavioral cases. I can tell you right now, having spent many years in shelters, that there's such a huge amount of dogs that have behavioral issues that are in shelters. And that's the fallout. That is the collateral damage for this movement. These people who are positive only, force free, whatever they want to call themselves, because they're not positive trainers. We're all positive trainers, obviously. right? Force free is you know is an oxymoron because it doesn't, it's not truly force free. And I argued this with with Zach George online, because these people will put a harness on a dog and will hold the dog so hard on that harness and try to redirect him and yank him and then use a cookie to try to get him. But it's such an aversive thing that you're now looking at mental abuse. And I would much rather be physically abused than mentally abused. Given the choice, I would prefer no abuse. I'd prefer a clear information and maybe a clear smack in the head. Go, don't do that, okay? My mother did it for years. I came out fine. People say, oh, you were abused by your mother. No. That's just simple logic. But the idea of this positive only thing constantly being a thorn in the side, these people, it drives me up a wall. And I say this over and over again. If they really want to do something, and again, my goal with this whole Zach thing was to try to bring people together, because, and I think I did. A lot of people came out and saw the fraud that is force-free, because it's a fraud. It's a complete fallacy. And I started stepping over and coming over to things like the International Association of Canine Professionals, and I hope to organizations like ARDO, but other things where people can see that there's a better way. We're not torturing. It's this kind of like, right now we're being painted with this brush of like, oh, here's the bad people, here's the evil people, here's the cartoons of these people stabbing dogs and plugging them into the wall socket and stuff like that. That's not the case. But I'll tell you something, in science, and this is why people said, are you a better trainer than a veterinary behaviorist? I said, well, any day, of course. That's because I train dogs. They're veterinary behaviorists. They have never trained a real dog. The issue becomes that science clearly tests on animals, which is abusive, which is cruel, and their studies are then looked at. I mean, if you look at, and I'm not a big fan of Skinner. I never really look at these things, but Skinner used the shuttle box experiment. Used experiments on dogs that were less than happy. If you saw somebody doing that on the street corner, you'd probably try to stop them or call the police. But yet, these are the people that trainers and animal rights activists are citing as their heroes, not dog trainers who have done great things, but people who have experimented on dogs and said, hey, this experiment I did on this dog is wrong. Well, that's a monumental statement, isn't it? I mean, but
wow.
That's
wow.
my issue. I just have such issues with science like that, because it's like, you know what science is? Science is the study of things that happen. Why not look at your work, my work, the work of other really good trainers and say, well, that works. That's a study. The dogs you've trained, that's a study. Okay, somebody said if I'd written down what I'd done over the last 10, 15 years and documented it, well, I would have the best study in the world. But I don't do that. I don't write things down. I mean, I just do it. I mean, I shoot from the hip. But you have a thing with positive only trainers too. You've got this issue, because I'm sure you said they've confronted you, right? Talk a little bit about that.
I'm just going to backtrack a little bit on a couple of the other things that you said there as well. So please remind me if I forget, which I'm liable to, because I'm of that age in life, that stage in life where that might happen. You just prompt me and say, Jamie, positive trainers. But the first thing that I wanted to talk about was, well, where you just said there about the science. I'm fortunate enough to be presently actively engaged in a research project, we are ensuring that research project. So when I am doing what I'm doing, when I'm recording what I'm recording, when I'm setting up situations in the way that they need to be set up, I'm ensuring that they are repeatable, that they're robust, that the information as best as possible is reliable that comes forwards. It's honest, it's riddled with integrity. And I'm very, very fortunate to be in the position to be able to be doing that at the moment, and that's going on for the foreseeable future. So on the science aspect of it, there's a lot of bad science, and there's not. So I've got a foundation degree in canine studies, which would classify as a science degree. I'm not a scientist as far as I'm concerned. I'm not really into scientific. I understand scientific papers. I read scientific papers, but to be completely honest with you, barring the vast majority, I just think I can. It's like. You can just see the holes in it straight away. You can from who's funded it, who conducted it, what the outcome, or what the question is, and the methodology and everything that goes through there. So, but that aside, so I'm as I say, I'm fortunate enough to with another great trainer or several great trainers. Not me being a great trainer, they are great trainers. I'm a trainer, they're great trainers who I'm working with on that. So I'm very, very fortunate enough to be doing that at the moment. The shelter aspect of it that you touched upon there, the fact that, and I would say this to. If there is anybody that's watching this who works in a shelter, I absolutely feel for you, because it isn't the people that are on the floor. I've worked in, 4 shelters. I've provided educational talks for shelters. I've provided consultancy, behavioural work for shelters back along. And I know that the people that are on the shop floor are good people. They are good people, and they're doing the best. Yeah, they are very, very good people, and they're doing the best they can, and they've got hearts as big as mountains, and they are as frustrated as you and I. Yes. It isn't them. It's the core of certainly the nationals, certainly the national centres where they've lost their way, and they've gone on to more about generating income to exist as opposed to putting that income into where it counts. If you're building multi-million pound rescue centres and you've got, conference facilities and canteens and such and such, but you can only house so many dogs, that isn't why the pensioners drop in their pound coin into your pot in order to help the plastic dog that they see put before them. So, and as you may well know, I put in fact, I found that I'd done it earlier on as well. I did it in about 2015, and then again in about 2018-19, I put a proposal forwards to all of in England, to all of the major national animal charities, animal rehoming centres, and said the next dog that you're about to destroy for a behavioural issue, don't pick up the phone. Just as easy as it is to call the vet or to get the vet to inject the dog, pick up the phone, give us a call, let me work with the dog, and let's see. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Go ahead and do what you were going to do. But let's see if we can't make it, which I'm sure that you would, you would sort of like be able to empathise with. Let's see if we can do something. And they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that because these dogs have been through too much distress already. And, we're not prepared to put them through. And hang on, we didn't talk about distress. No one's talking about we're talking about helping them, helping the dogs move forward, perhaps looking outside of your own box, your own sort of like choices. But that didn't happen. That's very frustrating. It's very upsetting. Very, very upsetting for anybody who's an animal lover to be in that situation and to see that happen. And when you talk about, to jump from the shelter situation, so to everybody who works in dog shelters, in any kind of animal rescue shelter, absolutely 100% support for you, love for you, respect and admiration for you. And, I genuinely feel the frustrations that you undoubtedly, even not if not overtly, but inwardly perhaps feel towards the constraints and the restraints that are placed upon you in working with the animals, where you know that they need help that you would be able to give. Moving on from that to where you said about the positive, I didn't forget, Robert, awesome. the positive only trainers. I don't believe there's such a thing as a positive. I don't label myself. I'm not a balanced dog trainer. I'm not a balanced dog. I'm a dog trainer. I'm a dog trainer. I'm a dog trainer. Deal with whatever you get. I where you have the balanced community, I probably lean, in many instances towards that. In other instances, I, lean slightly outside of or whatever, or more towards the centre of. But I don't think there's a need for labels. I think when you label yourself, then I think you restrict yourself, and when you restrict yourself, you limit what you are able to or prepared 100%. To do for the animal before you. Yeah. So I think we need to be open on that. The term where you take a label and you attach it to yourself, that's what I consider to be problematic. So it's not so much the term positive trainer as it is that the person who feels the need to take a label and slap it on themselves to define their ethical code of conduct, to define their morality. That's what I consider to be problematic, because you shouldn't need that. Your actions should speak for you. If you do things, if you produce results, if you take problems and you produce resolutions, if you take insecurity and you produce confidence, if you take death and you produce safety and life, that speaks for you. You shouldn't need to have a banner under which you march to feel this sort of like, this need to have, some kind of social support, this structure network, this scaffold for your own actions. Stand up, be yourself, stand and fall by what you do. And that is all that matters, So the positive, where somebody, it's a little bit like, and this is nothing against anybody who's religious or who has faith. I have no issue with that. But where somebody falls back on that in line with or in light of absolutely undeniable alternative evidence, but you still stand behind this screen of, because this is what will see me forward, then I personally, each their own, but I personally have a problem with that, because I think the other side of that screen is the more important thing than using that screen to protect my personal preferences, my personal beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, an interesting piece, and I talk about this a lot, the idea of positive, only positive, this or whatever. I think we've become a society of labels, right? And I'm not going to get into it because it's going to divide this conversation for people watching, but I'm just saying we've become a society of labels. One thing that I think is interesting is when it comes to training dogs, I think what I look at is to remove, and this is what I teach people who take my programs or people who come to me and ask, what advice can you give me to be a dog trainer? I say, put the dog's welfare first, right? The dog will only be alive for, if you're lucky, 10 to 15 years. The least amount of time that you can get the most amount of information in the most effective way is the most humane thing you can do to the dog.
Yeah.
And I think being humane to the animal is critical. I can give you two great examples where I, again, will go to the thing of I'm a trainer, not a positive trainer, whatever. I went to this Humane Society in Arizona many, many years ago. Must have been 8, 10 plus years ago. And there was a trainer who was in there who wanted to do a program, who'd seen I was doing programs, and it was a woman. And every dog in the shelter automatically got a prong collar, and that was the methodology of training. Now, I have an issue with trainers being myopic. That means every client who comes in gets, and there's franchises here in the States where everybody gets an e-collar. It's A, B, C, D, E, F. You get to Z, you graduate, boom. The owner gets that manual. It's A, B, C, D, E, F. It takes the individuality of the dog out of the picture. And that's critical whether you're teaching children or creatures like dogs, because they're very close to what I would consider human in that they do have emotions and feelings and stuff like that. I mean, and that's something coming from a trainer who uses, aversives per se. In this, they had a dog, and this dog would not sit. They said, the trainer worked with the dog for weeks. The dog won't sit. The dog cowers away. The dog won't sit. The whole thing. And I said, that's fascinating. I've never met a dog that wouldn't sit. In the thousands and thousands of dogs I've seen, I've never met one that wouldn't sit. And I said, and I looked at the dog and I said, let me just try something. I took the prong collar off. I put a slip lead on. I gave the dog a bunch of cookies, and I held a cookie over the dog's nose and I said, sit. And the dog sat. And they thought it was a miracle. And it was just the idea that some trainers don't think outside of the box. And that means if this style doesn't work, and this is very often the situation with people who are, and I don't want to ostracize people who are positive trainers because I admire them. I think they're doing a good thing. The issue I have is when they step over the line and start to criticize me. When you take the ability to ration out, you have a problem. I had a video I posted not too long ago of a Dutch Shepherd that was horribly reactive to my dog Jimmy, who's like the most bomb-proof dog in the world. And the guy had a prong collar on the dog, and the dog was getting agitated by the prong collar. And I said, have you ever tried not using the prong collar and using a slip lead and just letting the dog go out 10 feet and correcting the dog back? No, the trainer said to use an e-collar. And I said, well, I think you're stimulating the dog and putting the dog into a drive that the dog is not comfortable with. And again, I took that off. Within 5 minutes, the dog was laying down in front of my lab, taking treats and everything. So it's not about, again, I think I'm coming full circle. It's not about the tool, but we want the right to use that tool when we know it can be effective. We want to be able to say, hey, I will opt for radiation because I have cancer because the vitamin C and red light therapy isn't working, right? Why are we taking it off the table? I'm not because we have the cruelty laws. We don't need licensing for e-collars or anything like that. We clearly have cruelty laws. And as long as we have those laws, we should be using them, and we should be enforcing them firmly, no matter who the person is. But leave the tools on the table, because they can help us save a lot of lives with especially with what you're doing.
So, I mean, the final point there, where you're saying about the laws already in place, that's absolutely right. You don't need to. Those laws in most countries, the States and the UK, are very, very wide reaching. It's very, very easy to say to somebody, no, you're causing unnecessary harm and suffering to a protected animal. You don't need to polish that further. You don't need to refine it any more than that. When you're coming in to say no tool, I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but no tool in it's an inanimate object. No tool can do anything. I remember reading a book once, I think it was Bruce Lee, Artist of Life, or something like that, when he was talking about where he put a knife down in a room of students and talked about how the knife in itself wasn't the issue. That the knife wasn't the weapon. It was the way in which the knife was used, or something like that. It's exactly the same thing.
Sure.
And anybody with an ounce of sense can see that I'm not going to go out and spend £200, or $150, $300, $400, up to $1,000 or whatever, in order to abuse an animal that I can kick, that I can hit, that I can tie out, that I can. Why am I going to do that? Why am I going to? I'd have to be some weird kind of weirdo. In order to actually fund my fetish in that way. So, which is why I think any times when you do, and I'm not saying again, cards on the table, I'm not saying that I don't believe that somebody can't or hasn't misused an electronic training collar. Of course somebody can. Of course somebody will have at some point. But I think in a vast majority of instances, that would have been down to ignorance, certainly from a trainer's point of view, or ignorance. And by that, I just simply mean not knowing enough, not knowing any better, which again it's an education aspect, which I love, things like this, Robert, when you look back, if you went back even like 8-10 years ago, there wasn't this community of people. Social media has got its flaws, but it's also got its benefits, and its benefits are the fact that it allows people to be able to show visible results, to not just results, but actual work. It actually shows the interaction between dogs and peoples and procedure. It's such. Obviously, it's not, and I'm not somebody who will say A to Z that, there you go, see the entire thing, because I don't want mimicry, because the dog's an individual, and I think that people should seek, whether it's me or anybody else, that they should seek assistance and guidance when they're dealing with, with particular problems. But the fact of the matter is, this became the biggest sort of like menace to the ideological society, in the fact that you now had evidence, you now had visible evidence, and it doesn't matter what you write, it doesn't matter who you cite, it doesn't matter what you say, none of that matters where people can see. And when you can see something and you can feel it for yourself, you can witness the interaction, you can actually, it's palpable, this so-called fallout. I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing dogs that are extremely, don't get me wrong, there are instances where you can see things and you think, no, that's poor. It's poor training, it's poor understanding of animal behavior, it's poor, if you like, ethical thinking on the part of the person who's conducting the work. But where you have the vast majority of people who are compassionate, considerate, patient, kind, who are actually doing things for the right reasons, then you see the right results, and those right results are repeated. Science should be repeatable. It is. What you're seeing is repeatable. You're seeing the same things again and again and again. Why aren't these dogs shut down? Why aren't these dogs handler avoidant? Why aren't these dogs suffering from learned helplessness and other sort of like buzzwords that are thrown out there? And that ability for us to be able to show the subject, and at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I say, it really or yourself or anybody else, it doesn't matter if there is a dog in front and the dog is demonstrating particular behaviors in a particular way, then all that matters is that. But then we suffer from a basically confirmation bias, where people will pick up on, oh, it yawned. you're okay. So you got a 20-minute clip, and the dog yawned, so it's
his
giving
lip,
way
too.
a lot. Yeah, it's giving way a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
It shook itself. Yeah, they'll do
Yeah.
that when they switch from one
Yes.
motivational state to another.
Yeah.
That's not
Right.
necessarily exclusively indicative
Right.
indicative of a particular negative emotional state, welfare state,
Right.
etc. But it's problematic, when you're finding yourself having to siphon, a lot of information to try and glean. It's like panning for nuggets of ideology in there that can say, I am right, and let everything else drain through, the actual truth drain through. And that's, it's a sorry state for certain people. But as you'll know, we put out, I didn't actually start that off. It was Danny Wells at Unleashed, Danny Wells Unleashed Dog Training in the UK, who put out an offer for anybody to, in terms of predation, to come forward and to do this, to actually show it, to record it. A dog that had previously caused the death of a livestock animal, to undergo a 6-week training program, at the end of which it could be left in the presence of that livestock animal, both of which animals their welfare would be secured by alternative means anyway, and see if the training held. And Danny offered 2,500. I offered 2,500, blah blah, and it went over £50,000. I think it went up to about 60 grand almost at the end of that, and nobody came forward. But then afterwards, everybody had come forward, but nobody was heard,
Right.
and such and such. Let me just categorically stay on that, because I think that's something. I don't follow the Zach George saga personally. I don't. I find it detrimental to my mental health,
Yes.
if I'm honest. Whilst I wholeheartedly agree with aspects of it, but that was a problem. That was a problem because all that happened, and on the Ardo website, you'll see, if you go on the blog, you'll see the challenge, and it was written up there, the purpose behind it. And what we were looking to achieve and what we were looking to advance from that. And all it basically was, it was no challenge. It was no challenge to the force-free community. It was no saber rattling to a purely positive, person. It was basically, are there limitations to a particular technique, to a particular process? Yes or no? If there are limitations to that particular process, what are they? Where do they lie? Where are the boundaries of following one preferential style of training? What obstacles do they come up against, and when? How do we go beyond that? What can we do about it? But the first thing is, can we agree to accept and acknowledge that there are boundaries? And that was lost. That was lost in but it's written. It's on the page there and it's written. But it was lost in this whole sort of like a emotive argument of, you can't do it. Oh, it's inhumane anyway, and but you can't do it, and such, which was never the point. It was never the point. The point was to benefit the animal and to increase the education in people. And I say that as somebody, just in case anybody doesn't know, but I don't know if you have the Association of Pet Dog Trainers in the USA, but we have it in the UK. But I think the APDT UK is a lot more anti-aversive than the US version. And I was okay. Well, I think, there you go. That gives you an idea of just how, but I was a fully paid up member. I passed the processes got in, etc. I was a member of them. So I'm not somebody who's come at this from, one avenue, refusing to look down any alternative sort of like alleyways or anything else. But I think at the end of the day, if your heart's true, and I think in most, it doesn't matter which side of the argument you sit on. I think most people have a most good people. I obviously reject those people who are doing it for political or financial incentives. But where most people really have that sort of like need, that feeling, that desire to do better, to do more, to help more, then I really think there needs to be more collaboration and more coming together, as opposed to, this defense of trenches sort of things. History should teach us something about that.
I agree with you. I mean, just on the Zach thing, here's my issue. I saw a kind of, and I've seen it for many years, and I think my platform is big enough now where I could kind of rile against it. For years, I've seen this other side, this other side of the community. And I have so many friends who are dog trainers. And, I mean, I had a friend on last night. His name's Mike Reaver. He runs the biggest police dog training in the country, pretty much. I find I agree with more dog trainers than I disagree with them. The old adage that, if you have two dog trainers, the only thing they can agree on is the third one is wrong. I don't see that, because I like working with dog trainers. I like hanging out with them. I like talking to them. I don't like talking with anybody who's myopic, who it must be their way. The reason I really riled up against this thing with Zach was because he was saying, animals are being abused. These people are, there's other ways to do it. But it upset me, because people who are using e-collars are suddenly now made to feel like, oh my God, I shouldn't be doing this. Oh, what do you, why? And what happens is, when someone has a large platform, he has 3.4 million people. And I don't know how many of those are bots or not. I'm sure a lot, but you still have a large platform. When you have a large platform and you say something, okay. Now, if you say something that people want to hear, if you have this large platform and you say something like, oh, I'm against this because this is cruel, that's one thing. If I come out and I say something else, it's not as popular. But I was going to challenge that. And I was very sincere in saying to him, let's sit down. As two people, right? And I still feel that way. I mean, I don't dislike Zach George. I don't know him. I think he has the best intention. I think he genuinely likes dogs. And I think he genuinely thinks that what he's doing is the most effective, humane thing that can be done to dogs. Now, I certainly feel that with what I do the same exact way. So I thought, wow, here's two guys who could kind of have this passion for dogs, who could sit down and say, let's talk about that. That's, you come from a different way. You dance the salsa, I dance the waltz. Let's see about our passion about dancing, and forget about the salsa and the waltz, but let's come together and talk. But it immediately became this, this attack. Like, do you know more than science? Well, on some things, I know nothing about science, to be honest with you, but on the practical application of what science is studying, I know a hell of a lot more, because I've been applying it for 15 years. So I will challenge you, if you're going to say something that's going to hurt dogs, I am that passionate. I'm willing to sit down with you and talk to you and have a normal conversation. And I'm not going to insult you. I've got no reason to insult you. But it became this, tit for tat thing. And my question, again said, if your methodology would not work, would you seek out another methodology that had proved itself effective? And the answer essentially was no, but he skirted around the issue for 5 minutes in his answer. When he asked me the question, do I know more than a veterinary behaviorist about dog training? I said, of course I do. I'm a dog trainer. That's very clear. I don't mind being brass and being upfront. I know what I know. But I think an important thing is, like what you're doing with Ardo, is challenging the norm, is challenging these people who say, hey, this is wrong, but it's not wrong. Just because you say it's wrong doesn't make it wrong. And I think people like you and me, and people who have a platform, people who have the ability to do this, must stand up and try to bring these people. We don't need to, there's a few people in those movements, the radicals, that I think need to be squashed, right? Because they're making it bad for all those people. There's a lot of really good APDT trainers, right? Mm-hmm. But the problem is, you're ruled by a radical few who tell you, you can never step outside of this, you do this, and then you go to the enemy side. Like, you talk to somebody, or you agree that a correction might be needed. Now you're suddenly the enemy and you get death threats. That's insane. I mean, that's really, really radical. And that's really, really dangerous for people, because people get death threats and people get hurt with stuff like that. And I'm totally against it. That I will rile against. If anybody that I know would do that, I would be the first one to call them out. But in the interest of what's best for dogs and what's best for dog trainers who want to help dogs, you're right. We need to come together and we need to call these radical people out.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And the thing, with the Zach George, the only reason that I personally, not that my voice counts in any way anyway, but the reason I didn't get involved in that is because I don't even know that it's Zach George who's saying those things. Zach George is a mouthpiece, but Zach George is a mouthpiece. Zach George is somebody who, from what I've seen, I remember years ago watching him with his with his collie standing, he's led on his back with his feet in the air, and his collie's standing on his 2 feet as he puts them apart, and it stands up with its paws up like this, with its frisbee in its mouth on a TV show or something. I thought, that's sweet, that's nice, well done.
I can't do that.
It is cool. No, I know. But then as I went on, I had this sort of like ethical sort of like joust with myself, where I thought, where's the value in that for the dog?
Right.
The other side of me said, well, it's good for the dog. It's good. It teaches the dog good balance. It's good muscle structure, etc. And it's fun. And then I'm sort of thinking, really, or do I just want to do it because it's fun?
Right.
So I sort of like drifted away from that thing. That doesn't mean that I take away from the fact that it takes skill. It takes skill and talent to be able to do that.
Sure.
But like you say, I think it's accepting what people are good at, their area of expertise, and not sort of like stay in your lane, this is my lane. But if you're coming into my lane and you clearly it's detrimental to the, it's proving to be detrimental or proven to be detrimental to the impact or to the welfare of the dog, then that's something that we need to say, well, hang on a minute, maybe this works here. And maybe this works here, maybe the, as you say, the sort of like the smoke and the chanting, etc., isn't, and the red light and the vitamin C isn't quite so good as a proton beam therapy in this situation.
Right.
But great that you think it might be, but can we agree that perhaps it isn't? And I don't.
But let's try it.
Yeah,
let's try it. I'm for the red light therapy first.
Yeah.
But let's not say I'll never do the proton beam therapy. That's crazy. Right?
Exactly. And I think this is the way, this is like when you're talking with dog trainers and how it's great talking with dog trainers, I think but not ideologues. There's a difference.
Yes.
There's a difference, and a dog, and I have got dog trainer friends who do not use electronic training collars, who do not, and I have no issue with that, as I'm sure you have, and I'm sure you don't. But then they 100%. Don't deal with the same sort of things. And if they did, maybe they would, but instead they would refer across to somebody else. Sure. And that's sort of like, I remember having a round table discussion with various key members of charities and a few politicians and etc. And we were discussing electronic training collars. And the MP stood up and he said, "Okay, who would like?" He said, "Sometimes they talking about the ban or the proposed ban of e-collars in the UK." And he said, "Sometimes the best intended decisions can have unintended negative consequences. Who'd like to start the discussion?" And I'm a sort of like minnow in a table in a pool of sharks, if you like. And I stood up and I said, "I'll start." And I said, "I'll put my hand up." I said, "Can we have a show of hands for who's ever used one?" And I put my hand up, and I believe there was a vet, a couple of people away from me, who was supportive of responsible use of e-collars. And other than that, nobody put their hand up. And I said, "What are you doing here? What are you doing here? I would never go to a meeting of something that I hadn't taken the initiative to actually experiencing it so that I knew what I was talking about." And one particular, I won't say who the charity was, but it was a major UK charity, head of their training and behaviour, said to me, "Do you ever self-refer?" Oh, no, sorry, as in, do you ever refer out to other trainers if you come across something that you haven't dealt with before? And I said, "Well, I specialise in what I do, so generally I don't need to. But if I did, there are people who I could ask their opinions of." And she said, we do it all the time. We're veterinary referred, and we do it all the time." That appeal to authority argument, Robert, that's sort of like logical fallacy of we're veterinary referred, so do not such and such. I am such, so do not dare. So that holds no water with me, and it shouldn't hold water with anybody. Stand by your actions, not by the acronyms that precede or follow your name. But she said, we do it all the time. We've got a network of whatever it is, 450 behaviourists across the country. I said, "Do you all follow the same methodology?" She said, "Yes, we do." I said, "Well, that's what I call an echo chamber. You're not actually going to receive anything back. Then that isn't referring out for somebody else's opinion. That's referring out to confirm your own
opinion.
Beliefs."
Right.
Yeah, your opinion. And so, that's sort of like, I don't know, and another national charity as well, who basically behind closed doors said, "We agree with you. We agree with you, but we can't say it." And I just thought, wow, where is your integrity? And that's sort of like, I guess it was a blessing, really, because it really, really ignited the coals underneath my own integrity to push forward and say what's right, as opposed to, what I would like to be the case.
Wow. Well, I mean, this conversation, obviously, I mean, we could talk for hours.
Yeah, right.
What I don't want to do is, I don't want to make the podcast so long that people won't watch
No,
it
I
till
agree.
the end,
I
because
agree.
this is really
I
important.
agree.
Let's get this up. I mean, and I'm gonna put in the link description down below your ARDO, which is a very, very good organization, Association of Responsible Pet Owners, right?
Dog owners, dog
owners,
owners.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or else it'd be ARPO, right?
Yeah. It's
You should start that one.
joinardo.com.
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
Okay, joinardo.com. And I'll put a link in the description down below. You've got great stuff. I admire you. I look to your stuff all the time on social media. And let's continue this conversation in the future. Let's do that for sure. Because
Absolutely. Let's hope we can do it with a sort of like high five and a thank goodness that we've made some progress with people, rather than it being a repeat of the same sort of frustrations.
I mean, I really enjoyed our talk, and I'm going to get this up ASAP, and we'll continue this real soon.
You're a star. Thank you very much indeed, Robert.